Hi, and welcome to this episode where we're going to discuss and unpack non-interference, which is a gift of giving freedom. So before we explore why this is so important at this current time, as we really start to enter into the new consciousness, really creating this new earth, let's just cover and be clear on what it is not. So it is not being indifferent, it is not neglecting, it is not abdicating, and it's not being indifferent and not caring. It's just supporting from a different consciousness and a different place. Okay, so let's talk about first why this is important. So we are in the era of frequency, and we're in the era of sovereignty, which means we're all individually and as a humanity really learning how to come into full alignment of our freedom, understanding that we're free, and then starting to really express and create that. And that's really actually a little bit confusing and perplexing for us on a lot of levels because we've been so conditioned to operate from codependency, which is definitely not in an alignment to our freedom. So as we start to learn to become more soul infused, connecting more to our soul's guidance and our inner resonance, that starts to really clarify our own personal discernment, which means we are activating and honoring and acting and fulfilling our own unique soul map, our own unique blueprint for which we are here at this time in this incarnation to potentially, fulfill and express and offer our service, our gifts and abilities from that place. So that our blueprints can be extremely different. And because of that, we can still have a lot of different kind of approaches to things, beliefs about things, perceptions. And most importantly, we can have certain resonance to do certain things than other people potentially do. And it's not necessarily that it's right or wrong or good or bad. In fact, we want to still really practice coming out of that judgment, because if we are in judgment, perceiving something as right or wrong or good or bad, or that we feel it should be a specific way, we are then not necessarily honoring our own personal unique blueprint, but we're actually operating more from the ego self, which disconnects us from our soul self, our heart-centered self. So what we're invited to start to practice is starting to really come into that discernment. First and foremost, what is ours and what is our own inner resonance? And the more we do that, the more we're able to offer that same gift to somebody else. Because truly, if we're going to be in our freedom, that also means we need to be allowing others to be in their freedom. And we are entering into the unity consciousness. However, that does not mean we're all still going to have the same perceptions or beliefs or values or the way that we want to respond to certain things, because we all still are showing up, contributing in our own way, all contributing, making our own kind of mark that's important in this great big kind of landscape that we're all contributing to, especially right now in these really pivotal historical times and confusing, perplexing times, and potentially very emotional times. So why it's important is because if we're potentially interfering with somebody else's choices, decisions, or actions, that means it's under the umbrella actually of control and manipulation, even if we're doing it from a place where we feel it's helpful. So we're interfering basically if we have some type of projection or agenda that we're trying to kind of like interject. And most of the time, this is not conscious. And projections that are at an all-time high at this current time, because there's so much, happening that's awakening our shadow in order for this higher light frequency energy to anchor in, and because that's part of the healing process. So there is a lot of shadow being awakened for people, because if it's been suppressed or dormant, it needs to come up and out. It's kind of like that flushing or detox out emotionally. So that's definitely a variable as well during these times. But again, going back to this codependency, we're used to looking at something from a specific way or a specific view. So our invitation now is, how can we first and foremost just take a step back and ask, I'm seeing somebody, I'm seeing them in their process, I'm seeing them make certain choices and decisions, and they don't necessarily resonate with me, or I don't agree with them. So our invitation is to kind of ask, why don't we agree with that? Or why are we feeling like we know more than they potentially know. And sometimes we may see them making a decision or a choice that's not going to necessarily be in their highest good or highest outcome. But at the soul level, we may actually not really know what's actually happening and why the soul's, kind of navigating some of these experiences or classrooms. Because to the soul, the root of the soul, it really is here to learn, grow, and heal. And definitely wants to offer its, talents, its gifts, its, offering that contribution. But most classrooms are still all about our evolution. We're always evolving, in the body or not in the body. We're always evolving. So our own personal blueprint and our own chosen experiences, sometimes we won't always be clear, even within ourselves when we're having a certain experience, why we are. Sometimes it's not until after the fact that we can actually really then see and claim, what gifts, opportunities actually have I really received because of that experience. And sometimes we do need to go through a little bit of friction and a little bit of tension through an experience, because sometimes that's the awakening catalyst. And sometimes it's the friction that we need in order to develop a skill or to actually burn off some of this kind of like controlling aspects of our ego, old ego self that's no longer serving. And so sometimes that's the process. The hardest part potentially is when we're witnessing somebody suffering and we're witnessing somebody potentially making choices that we know are going to be hurtful to them. And inspired action is what we want to start to get into alignment with when we feel we do need to actually act. Can we really be aware when we are actually interfering with somebody's actions and choices? This is important for a couple of reasons. Well, one, because we're coming out of the codependency. And we often will be projecting or transferring our own beliefs from our own experience or blueprint or programming. So first question for us again is, why do I feel I know what's best for that person? And the other thing is that when we're interfering, and that can even be thinking about that around for a person, that's energy that that person has to now contend with. So we're learning in a really subtle way to be aware of, where are our thoughts going and where is our energy going towards a person, and really starting to understand, why do we feel that we do need to interfere? So before we unpack this a little bit more, if you have children, often, a question is, well, I have children and obviously I'm not going to give them absolute freedom. So of course not. And sometimes even as adults in partnership, there could be something that plays out, or depending on certain, kind of variables. So that would be a container. And so it would be, finding and giving freedom within a container that's agreed upon or that is age appropriate. And an example of that, if you have young children, for example, and they obviously aren't, kind of mature enough yet, they still need a little bit, obviously, of being under your umbrella of responsibility. Then practicing giving freedom could be giving them 5 choices of clothes to wear. And then they get to choose that. And say they choose one piece of clothing out of that 5 and they completely look not what you think that you would want them to look going out into the world. You're allowing that. You're giving freedom. And that's what we're really learning to do. We're starting to really learn how to, really cleanly be accepting and be allowing and being supportive of somebody just, being in their own free expression and figuring themselves out. So often, again, this is really important for us as we enter into the era of frequency and freedom, is, who are we? And what is our own personal blueprint? And sometimes we need to kind of figure that out a little bit. And if the soul has chosen a specific classroom, for that purpose or for other reasons that aren't necessarily even our business, that means that soul again will have to go through that, or personality will have to go through that, needs to go through it, has chosen to go through it. And again, this can be really difficult when we see some suffering, but again, this is a school it is a tough school. And again, every soul that has incarnated here has, chosen to be here for the learning, rare and unique learning that this particular school offers. So if a soul wants to learn something and we interfere and we change that direction, or we change a choice point for another, that soul will still want to learn it. So it's going to come back anyways. And then again, how does that affect us too? because we've just now interfered with somebody's spiritual process. So how do we discern between when we want to help somebody and support somebody? One of the most powerful things that we can first again do is get neutral and coming, from a place of being clear that I'm coming from a clean place of love and compassion. I want to support this person if they're open, willing, and at the current time able and wanting to receive that support. So I find the first thing that we can really do with that, once we're neutral, is asking, do you want my support? And what would that look like if they do? Do you want my support just to hold a space? Do you want my advice through my word, wisdom, or something I'm potentially perceiving or seeing that you might not be able to see? Or, do you want me to help you make some choices, bouncing some things off of me? So again, being clear, but we're asking first and we're giving that person a choice, because again, we don't want to infer what we feel would be or think would be best for that person, because ultimately what we want to do, if we're supporting and that person has agreed they want our support, we want to again come from a place that's clean and that empowers that person to ultimately go in and listen to their own personal inner wisdom and inner guidance, inner resonance. So even if we're supporting, asking questions is usually one of the best ways to help a person do that. We can ask questions, and again, learning how to ask questions that are very neutral without inferring our own kind of projections or our transferences of our own beliefs or how we think things should be going. So how do we get into inspired action too? That's where we're really connected to our heart, and we come from that first and foremost neutral place. And really, we can be meditating on it or really pondering in our heart or really asking our spiritual guidance. And we can also tune into another person's higher self, their soul self, or their spiritual team respectfully. We can ask them if there's something that I can help and offer without interference. Then please, download that wisdom, knowledge, understanding, or give me a full knowing in my heart that I can approach this in a way where I am not affecting interference and I'm not taking away somebody else's freedom. So this potentially is going to be, a bit of a slippery slope for us this year and maybe next year as we see so many changes, revelations, and things start to really kind of play out on the world stage, because there's going to be a lot of belief systems that are going to be rattled and shaken up for people. And there's going to be many different places that people are coming from, depending on their level of awakening, depending on what they've healed already, and just depending on, many variables. So what we want to do, again, is just kind of be aware, be curious. We want to be approaching non-interference, means we're being curious observers, and we're just allowing sometimes things to unfold and play out. The inspired action comes from that place where we, again, have that clear, clean knowing, and we do not have an attachment or an expectation to the outcome of what, that person or that experience potentially will play out. So that's how we can kind of, know when we want to and need to potentially intervene, but we want to intervene through inspired action, not through our own agenda, basically. So I want to leave you with, a story that kind of hits home on the complexity from a soul perspective on the choreography of things playing out. And this can be utilized as and used as a reference for our own individual experiences working with just other people or, other groups of people, or what is playing out on the world stage, because things aren't always as they seem. And especially right now in these really kind of pivotal times of this current shift where we're at in this paradigm shift. Okay, so there's a person, a mystic called Edgar Cayce, and he was basically a pioneer mystic in this past century who really kind of started to come in and introduce and working with the Akashic records to a degree that previously maybe hadn't been done before, or that we were aware of, or predominantly weren't aware of. So he was able to access Akashic records and read them for people. Akashic records it's like our own personal library where all our experiences and lives and memories and emotions are stored. And so, we have our own personal Akashic records, and there's Akashic records for humanity, for Mama Gaia, etc. So he had his gift and ability was he would go in and he would be able to access Akashic records and then be able to offer support in healing and offer support in transformation and helping people to shift consciousness as a result of this information. So at the end of his life, so he'd been doing this his whole life, so probably read thousands and thousands of different people's records, and he worked with even scientists and things like that. Like, he was definitely very reputable and very skilled. So at the end of his life, one of his last readings actually was this story. So he had two sisters from New York City or state come to see him. And they said to him, we have been everywhere to every type of person for help and for healing around this situation. You are our last resort. And they said, our situation is that we have a brother that we love dearly, and he's a complete drug addict living homeless underneath one of the bridges in the city. And we've tried everything that we can to, help him to clean up his life and to get him to, just kind of get clean and get sober and etc. And so Edgar Cayce said, okay, well, let me take a look into his records. So he looked into his records and he said, well, actually, this is the highest consciousness soul I've actually ever read. And they were perplexed and they're like, how can that be? He's like, a drug addict under, living homeless. And Edgar Cayce said his actual role here, why he's come and incarnated in this time, is to actually teach you sisters compassion. So that's just an example. And of course, not everybody in that situation, that's the case. Of course not. But it's, this story I love because it's an example of the complexity sometimes of, what a soul is actually doing and what it's, really here for. And it's not really our business what somebody else's experience and story is. It's really about ours. So, just one final note, it said that, oftentimes we can feel very, also very alone in our process. And sometimes there's many reasons why we feel we need to meddle or interfere. But at the end of the day, we just really all want to potentially feel good, light, joyful, loving. Not everybody, actually, but if you're watching this or listening to this, then you're probably one of them that do. And at the end of the day, sometimes it can feel very lonely or just confusing if somebody doesn't understand our path. And we can feel the judgment of that. And that can actually delay, block, slow down, and again, interfere, and sometimes even fully shut down ourselves, or we can do that for others. So it's said that, at the end of the day, we're only responsible for understanding our own blueprint, our own pathway, because ultimately that's what we are here each individually to do. And then from that place, we can then truly, potentially really offer different kind of support and different kind of, compassion or holding space for people, but it's coming from a different consciousness. And the ultimate gift in this awareness is that we can, again, hold a presence, because holding that higher presence definitely has the most impact, especially, if we do see somebody that is suffering, and that's not easy ever, or a group suffering, we can always hold a space, a clean space of just holding love and holding compassion. And as we see things unfold, if we have a response that isn't neutral, and neutral is not caring. Neutral means I have a deeper understanding potentially, and I can see things from different perspectives, but I'm not charged by it. Doesn't mean I don't care. It means that if I have a response to it, like anger or complete grief or sadness, that means it's stirring up for me because it's in my subconscious to be healed, or I'm potentially processing it for the collective. So I want to process that. Then I come back into the neutrality, which means now I have a choice to actually get into an alignment with a higher frequency and hold space and potentially, request that light or that compassion and that support be sent to that person or to that group, because that group or that person could be going through that, and it's a pivotal step that is needed for the greater whole or the greater good or the greater unfolding, of what we're seeing. So often we're only able to see one little step in something. We're not always able to see the full picture, usually until after the fact, and sometimes not at all. So important for us potentially to keep in mind, especially as we navigate through this year and through maybe even next year. All right, so wishing you a very beautiful and free and supportive and compassionate life, day, and experience. Namaste.